which is a slightly different principle or element, sorry, as to the L shape is the design, but in a way, the movement or story is the way of getting your viewer to wonder what's around the corner of this road. Right, let's get some paint going. I'm sort of happy enough with my sketch. As I say, I wouldn't normally be putting so much pencil work on under my paintings as this. That does vary in degrees as to what the subject matter is. I find that whenever you're painting a scene with buildings in any man-made object, you probably will find yourself putting more of a drawing down first. If it was just a wild landscape, sometimes with wild landscapes, I don't even do a pencil sketch. I just go straight in with paint and brush. Okay. I'm going to start probably with the big round brush. And I'm just placing it in water here. Sorry, I didn't mean to say this. I could do away with the sky. It might just be one shape too many. So I'll demonstrate what I mean here. If a photographer sometimes will choose to do things like blurring out the background, so you probably wouldn't even know. Beyond this point here, beyond the little row of cottages, a photographer has a technique and a method for blurring areas out, and we could do that as painters. So you'd go in, so I'll show you exactly what I mean here. I'm going to pre-wet this area above the cottages back there and up into my tree. But if you look, I'm staying out of the building here on the right-hand side. I'm staying out of the row of cottages, and I'm only just going slightly over the top of the left-hand shape there. But I want that to be an area that will paint itself. So that's just water going on, making sure there's plenty of it. And I'm making sure by doing this 2 or 3 times, it helps the water break the surface of the paper because the paper's got a resist on it size. But now, I think it's ready. I think we just start with a cool color. Perhaps we'll start with a little bit of cobalt blue. So let me just show you. I'm picking up, this is cobalt blue. And I'll just start with something nice and gentle, you know, to get me off the mark, if you like, just to settle if you're nervous at all for starting something, or you're a little unsure, this is a great way of starting any painting. Find somewhere that you can pre-wet and you can almost play around in that territory. Okay, so I'm just shaping that up. Not a particularly strong pickup of paint, not a very strong application. There's plenty of water with a bit of paint. So as I say, let's not worry too much about the sky. If there's a bit of blue at the top of this area, all well and good, but it's not my concern. I think what we do is we'd be better off just creating an organic sort of color and shape back there. So I've just picked up a little bit of raw sienna this time, and I'll pop that in with a bit more extra cobalt blue. And we'll just think about those shapes in a very loose fashion. There is the tree up here. Like this. Maybe there's a little bit of green back there over the top of the house there. And I'm already envisaging that this area, this loose sort of area that I'm painting right now, will probably be revisited at some point when it's a bit drier. But we'll just, this is a nice little settling of the nerves, if you like. I always think it's good to do that. If you've got if you're a little bit unsure before you start a painting, find somewhere like this that you can just play around with paints. You should probably stop when you think, oh, if I, that's probably going to be about the right tonal value. You don't want to go too dark at this stage because it will be nice to go back into it a bit later. We might want to infer that there are a couple of buildings back there. If you went too dark now, you wouldn't have that option later. There is another way of doing that. As I mentioned earlier, there's always at least 3 ways of doing everything. I could go dark in here. And if I did go dark at this stage back here, and I wanted, what I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show a couple of little houses back there, what I'd have to do is obviously apply a lot stronger paint, more paint, less water. It will go darker. And then I would have to wait for the right moment when the when the paint has gone into the paper and it's looking a little drier, then I could scrape the inference of a couple of buildings into the paint. I can't do it now with this because 2 things. There's not enough paint there for a mark to appear. There's not enough strength there, not enough tonal strength there for a mark to appear. And 2, it's too wet. You will not be able to scrape a shape out if it's too wet. Right, I think now, I'm sort of off the mark here. I'm quite happy with what I've done so far. Let's look at perhaps getting a hint of what's going on over on this left-hand side. Now, as I say, I don't want the shape on this side to be as big as the shape on this side. So this is a hedgerow that goes back there somewhere. Looks something like that. I glance up at my my photo reference and I paint what I think I can see. Maybe wrong, but if you think you can see it, that's what you should be painting. Don't stop and think whether you're right or wrong about it. It's usually your first response that does the best work, that provides the best, most reliable answer. So you look up very quickly, think you can see something a bit dark there, something a bit dark there, something a bit dark up here. Don't doubt yourself. Don't let that horrible thing, doubt, creep in. This is what I think it looks like. Seems to be something slightly green creeping over towards this side. And there are bushes and shrubs and things on this side. Something about there that will leave. Remember I said there might be a vehicle there. So eventually when we get to go darker around these shapes, I mean, what I just painted there might eventually disappear because, it'll be dark on dark. But it's okay. I'm feeding my sort of, if you like, I'm keeping my thread alive. I'm keeping my train of thought alive by just almost drawing with the brush. I think that's a little bit darker, so I'll go back into it a little bit, about there. And of course, that will need to be darker eventually, but probably not right now. I think we could go just over the tops of the cottages. Just to help us later. This will serve to this will look better later because of what I'm doing now. We've had a chance to dry off. Okay, probably need to speed dry this now. Before I do, I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with this relatively flat line, unbroken. I shouldn't call it flat or straight. It's not straight. It's neither. It's not flat. It's not straight. But what it is, it's even. That's probably a better description. The line that runs along this left-hand side is an even, unbroken, mostly unbroken line. Whereas, of course, when we get to this side, that's very different. That is not an even line. It's very broken and has shapes sort of interfering along its edge. Okay, right. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to speed dry this. And when after I've done the speed dry, I'll make a decision, and I'll explain why I'm taking the decision as to what I do next. Okay. It doesn't usually take much to dry it. You're only drying it enough so that, for a couple of reasons. One of them being it stops you making contact with your hand with wet paint. And of course, it allows you to move on, because there's certain things you'd rather be painting on dry areas than areas that are still damp. So what we've done essentially is we've used a wet in wet so far. We put water down, we put a weak color down, we put a slightly stronger color on top of that. That was wet in wet. That's a very general term, wet in wet, too, because really it can get quite intricate. You can go from wet into wet, wet into damp, wet into almost dry. You know, there are varying degrees, and it's about learning and knowing how to match the mix of what's in your paint brush, the strength of water to paint in the paintbrush, and how that particular loading of the brush will respond when it makes contact with an area of really wet paper or an area that's slightly drier. These things can only be learned with experience and just constant use. I'd love to be able to say, well, I can show you exactly when you need to do that. Trust me, if there's a tutor out there capable of showing that, you must let me know, because I would love to watch them. There are many theories and a lot of very helpful. There's a lot of helpful stuff out there on that issue. I'm talking about how to load the paintbrush, how much water to paint to use, how the consistency, the strength of paint. It is so intricate that only personal experience will teach you how to do it. So you just have to do it a lot on bits of scrap paper. Okay, right. Yeah, the decision I was talking about is this. This is something I personally prefer to do. I like to go in at this stage and give myself a little bit of detail on the things that I know will need detail. Now, you may see other people waiting to do any detail till the very end. Well, I do both. I reserve the real detail, the finishing detail, to the very end. But the reason why I like to go in and put in some of the detail at this stage is so that it shows me, it keeps me focused, keeps me in line with my ideas, my original ideas. With this initial bit of detail work with a small brush, I can say, well, this is an area that I want to pop out. So I might just do a bit of work around here with the odd couple of details around here, a little bit of detail around here. And so when I get to the end of my painting, I know where to keep my my finer detail, the sort of detail that pops the focal point out. So by doing a little bit of detail now keeps you in line, okay? Keeps everything in line. And the other thing which is almost as important is that when you put say a window on a building that's back here, okay, and on this white paper, when it goes on now, as it will fresh, it's going to look really awkward. It's going to look like it's a dark mark on a pale area. It's going to look awkward. It's going to look like it's standing out. It's been cut out and stuck on. But of course, it will dry eventually. And by the time I get to putting on a weak wash of color over these buildings, those hard shapes of windows and doors, etc., will be softened by the application of the wash on top of them. Now, the alternative way of doing that, of course, is to put the wash on, and I do this sometimes myself, put the wash on first, and then you have to wait before you can put your windows in. And you must time that really well, because if you wait too long, the wash that you've put on is dry and you will be painting a hard edge shape which will look cut out and stuck on. If you can time it right by where you've put the wash on and it's just gone into the paper, you can fairly confidently make a mark on that damp area and the shape won't dissolve too much. It'll just soften at its edges, which is, so the net result is exactly the same. It's a strong shape, but it doesn't have hard edges. Right, let's get to my the mix that I'll need for, just using a little pickle lid here, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. These don't have to be too strong. There's a bias in this mix towards the towards the blue, towards the ultramarine blue. Now that's not, strictly speaking, you see, a dry mix. There's quite a, if you can see the shine off that in the camera, don't know whether you can or not, but there's, yeah, there. There's quite a bit of water in this, but there's a lot of paint as well. We'll reserve the real dry brush mix for a little bit later. So looking up, I've got windows, something like this. I'm not going to spend too much time. The longer you spend trying to replicate exactly what you see, the worse those shapes are going to look. Okay. In time, you develop a knack for this, just to do things. The quicker you do them, the better. And even if one does go wrong, it always still looks better if you leave it alone than if you'd gone in to try and correct it. So sometimes use a little bit of cobalt blue in this mix just to make something look slightly different from its neighboring shape. Now again, I can travel across the back there because I can see there are some slightly darker areas. Now this is a bit more dry brush because of the speed that my brush is traveling across the surface of that paper is fast. And even a wet, semi-wet mix like this will dry brush if you're light-handed enough and swift enough with a quick movement. So just reloading my puddle a little bit. It doesn't last forever, of course. So you've got to pick up more and try and get that back to that same sort of water paint ratio that you were using a moment ago. Well, I will try to get that car in if I can. I'm not going to let it stress me out. There's a shape something like that around the car. Now we could just indicate roughly the line of those roof edges. It's interesting in the photo, isn't it? Because you can't really see, the light is so strong on those cottages that it's softening edges. It makes the edges of the roofs where they meet the vertical of the wall of the house very light. There's no clear delineation as to where that line is. So I'm being careful not to overdo it myself. Okay. Now there's temptation here to put a shadow in with this brush, with this mix, but I mean you can, but I think that's something that we'll tackle again on another lesson. I'm going to stay focused and stick to what I'd decided to do and keep my shadows to the end. Okay, so along this edge you probably will need to make, seems to be a little gate or something. There's some sort of break, vertical, very subtle, but something vertical about here. That's probably a gate into a property on the left. Right, what about this area? Well, again, just going to show a little bit more warmth in this because it's closer, and need to show off where that roof line is. I think we will keep the roof of this house fairly light. I don't know, obviously it's white paper at the moment, but but I think it needs to be lighter than, say, the tree back there when it goes in. There are other shapes, not sure what they are. So I'll just hint upon them. Now, it's interesting. There seems to be a row of very small windows back here. Now, this property does have a bit of perspective to consider, this right-hand building. Let me just grab a straight edge, a ruler, for a moment. First of all, before I start talking about the lines of this building, they will converge on a horizontal line, and that horizontal line is our eye line. The eye line is also exactly the same thing as the horizon line. You can call it whatever you want. I tend to refer to it as the eye line if there's going to be figures in my paintings. I tend to refer to it as a horizon line if it's just a landscape. And this is give you a couple of ideas here as to how I would work out where the eye line is in this painting. If we would assume that if there's a doorway down here, and that doorway is about there somewhere, then unless the person is a giant, you'd have to place the eye line as they approach that door, because this is flat ground, I hasten to add. Okay, the road doesn't go up, there's no gradient, upward gradient, and there's no downward gradient, so it's a mostly flat. It may appear to go up in the photo, of course, but that's just the effects of diminishing lines. It's mostly a horizontal flat area of ground, so we can safely say that the head of a person entering that house there at the door is going to be somewhere between, I don't know, 18 inches and a foot off the top of the doorway. I know that there are variations, especially in old cottages, doorways can be very low, but this is just you do need a rule of thumb. So I would say that the eye line, horizon line, is going through there, something like that. And that is a constant. You can rely on that. It's never going to change. That's going to be a horizontal. And that horizontal line will always be parallel to your ground line. And I use in the ground line term quite loosely here, I'm using the edge of my paper. This line here, the horizontal edge of my paper. So it's got to be parallel to that horizontal. Okay. Now then, this is what I was getting at. This line here off the roof edge will eventually run down here, probably going to be off the edge of my paper in this case, but it will land on the eye line, somewhere on the eye line. So it comes down here and it's probably over here somewhere, but there. So will this one, that one, and I need to adjust it because I can see that's a bit flat, but they will both of these lines will converge in exactly the same place on the eye line over here. So will the top lintels of this row of windows. That too will land on that vanishing point. And what we're dealing with here is a single vanishing point from this building. Okay. If there were other buildings at different orientations, different aspects, then there would be multiple vanishing points. But we generally only really need to concern ourselves with this one building. Okay, and the bottom of the sill. So there's the top sill of the window, there's the bottom sill of the window. And if you look at it, as you get closer to this, which is the eye line, which is perfectly horizontal, the closer that these lines, perspective lines, get to the eye line, the flatter they become until they land on it and they themselves become perfectly horizontal. Okay. Top of the wall, this is why I was struggling a little bit earlier. Now it depends. The top of this wall could be at a different orientation to the actual building, and its vanishing point could be, say, here somewhere on the eye line. But more often than not, it's better just to keep everything on that same perspective. So the top of my wall would do something like that, because that line too is going to end up over here, converging with the lines from the windows and the roof edges and things like that. Play that one back on the video when you see it, and it will make sense if you spend enough time practicing it and thinking about it. So I've got these windows, maybe a door back here. I can't see now. I think this has got to be a bit of you performing a bit of imagination. So there will be let's suggest, even if I don't show it in the finished painting, let's suggest that there's a door there. Just makes me feel happier. And this is what I always mean in my packs when I send out that instruction on the sketch. We often have to just simply put things in to appease our understanding, to feed our understanding, to make us feel comfortable with before we start painting, because there's nothing worse than not knowing what is supposed to be over here and what's supposed to be over there before you start painting. It's almost guaranteed to make your painting go wrong if you haven't established what you're going to be doing when you get there, if you get over here. And that's why it doesn't always have to represent something, because you don't know what it is. It's even the photograph doesn't reveal its true identity. It's just a shape. But as long as you put a shape in there and say, well, when I get to paint here, that's the shape I'm going to be making. People can make up their own minds as they can read it, because I can't read it. It's impossible. But they can make up their own minds as to whether they're looking at a doorway, some shape that's sat on top of the wall, whatever. But it just needs to be something, rather than it just being a random shape. You didn't know what to do, and you end up playing around with the paint too much, and it goes horribly wrong, and it just looks a mess. So there we are. Right. Okay. So I've got a bit of information in. I'll just put a little bit more of that stuff in before I'm done here. And again, I've mentioned these color mixes, folks. Every time. So if you haven't got them now, best thing to do is to check it out on the video. But if you're painting along and you are stuck, then yeah, very brief. This is just burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Right. Okay. I think that's enough of this detail that I mentioned, just to keep me, on track. We'll save any further detail now, probably for the end. Hi folks, that brings us to the end of part 2. If you haven't already, please watch part 1 of this tutorial, as obviously it'll make more sense if you watch them back to back. Depending on when you're watching this, part 3 is already out there, or it's about to be uploaded in a week from now. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please remember to hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. And if you want immediate notification as and when my new videos get uploaded to YouTube, then all you have to do is hit the bell icon. In the meantime, happy painting, and I hope to have your company again in the future.